Hi guys, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to do skin texturing and shading in Blender. So we'll be going over how to create a realistic or semi-realistic type of setup like this. I'll also be showing you guys how to do normal maps baking and ambient occlusion baking and stuff like that in Blender, so you can use that in your textures as well. So we'll be baking our stuff from a high resolution mesh onto a low resolution mesh and so on. So here's a workflow overview. First, baking. We're going to bake ambient occlusion and normals in Blender, and then bake the actual diffuse, paint the actual diffuse and roughness textures, and then we're going to use Photoshop to enhance and correct stuff, any mistakes or whatever. You could also use any other photo editing software, I'm sure. We could then we'll be doing the skin shader in cycles. Okay, so here's my character that I've already made, and I've already retopologized, or whatever you call it. I've already done that, so I've got a nice low res mesh thing. And I've also got a high resolution sculpt that I brought in from ZBrush, but you could do this in Blender as well if you wanted to. You'll see the high res mesh has a lot more detail than the low res one, and we'll be baking all of this onto the low res thing. So for baking, I use Blender Internal. It gives the exact same results as Cycles, or it should. I just find it a little bit more intuitive. So just switch to that, and then we'll want to, before we start baking, we'll want to just unwrap our mesh. So I'm going to select a few seams here and just unwrap them. So I'll unwrap around the ears, and I'm in edge select mode, by the way, and also this line from about here all the way down to here, so that line right there. So once you have them selected, Control E on the keyboard, mark seam, and you'll notice they turned red. That just means they're UV seams. Let's switch to the UV editing and just select all our vertexes. And just before I unwrap, I want to select these two nostrils here as well. They sometimes give problems with, they distort the nose a little bit, so we can just Control E, mark seam. Okay, select everything, U on the keyboard, unwrap, wait for it. Okay, here we go, looks good. This is a simple unwrap. This is probably the most simple form of unwrapping a realistic human face, but it gives solid results, and really for our purposes it'll work just fine, I guess. So okay, but yeah, that's the face. So let's switch back to default. Okay, so we now have an unwrapped mesh. Now we want to add an image to which we can bake the normal information. So in edit mode, select all your vertices, and then in the UV edit mode, select them all as well. So they have to be all of them should be selected. So then you add a new image. Hang on, new, and we'll do a, let's say, a 4K bake. So that's 1496 by 1496 pixels. That's pretty large, actually. You don't have to go that high for all your maps, but it's good to go to 4K or even 8K for your normal bakes. So I'll be using 4K throughout. Okay, now that we have our baking image, we'll call it baking image. Baking image. Good. We can save it. F3. I'll save it to my textures folder. I'll call it normals. Normals, save. Okay, because we're going to be baking the normals first. Okay, now in your render tab, down here in the bake section, switch to normals and make sure it's set to tangent space normals and selected to active, should be switched on. Okay, now go to the layer with your high resolution sculpt, select it first, and then back to your low res one, select your low res one, just wait for it. Good. So now you can see I've selected the high res mesh first and the low res mesh second. It should be selected in this order for correct results. So now that we have them selected, hit bake, and it's going to think about this for a while, so I'm just going to pause the recording. Okay, so our normal map is baked. It's looking good. Let's just zoom in here. Yeah, it's looking great. The good part about normals is that later on in cycles we'll be able to set the strength of the pores and the normals and so on. So it's really nice. Next up we want to do a ambient occlusion map. So we just switch to that and make sure we've still got everything selected the way it was. And just hit bake. Default settings down here should be good. And just wait for it. Okay, so that's done. The ambient occlusion, it's looking good. It's a little bit grainy, but that really doesn't matter. You can get away with that. If it looks too grainy, just know that it's because of your settings here in the World tab. Here under Gather, this it's all grayed out, but this here is usually by default it's set to 5 samples. That's what's making your ambient occlusion bakes grainy. So if you want a better bake, just go up to about 10 or 15 and you'll be good. Just know that it does take longer than to bake. Okay, so let's save this one as well. F3, and I'm gonna call that AO. Come on. Thank you. Great. Okay, so now that we've baked out our maps and everything, it's time to start painting. And for the painting work, I'm going to be using a technique called projection painting. That's sort of where you overlay an image over your 3D model and paint through it. It's like you can do photos or whatever, you can paint directly onto your model. So it's sort of a technique to get realistic maps really fast, and I use it a lot. I kind of find it very good for my character work. So we're going to be using that and projection painting, and we'll be doing it in Blender render as well. So first thing you want to do to set up your painting is to add a new material. I deleted the old one, so new, call it skin material. Of course this will be rendered in the end in cycles, so this is just temporary. So you now go into texture paint mode, and you'll see once you've entered the texture paint mode that everything is pink, and that just means there is no texture assigned to this material. So what you want to do from the start is to these tools on the side here. If you press T in texture paint mode, you get a bunch of tools here. These ones over here, I think these top ones are related to texture painting mostly. So in the top one, tools, you want to go to add paint slot and add a diffuse color. We'll be painting the diffuse color first. So for this tutorial I'm just going to make a low res one, 2048 by 2048, and usually I do 4096 by 4096, that's 4K, but for this tutorial I'm painting a little lower res, just for an example. Okay, and we'll call this one skin fuse. Okay, so now it turned black. It's got a brand new texture right inside that slot, and if you want to find the actual texture image, you can go to your UV image editor and just find it over here. We named it Skin Diffuse. It's this one over here. So you can see it's perfectly black, 2048 by 2048 image, and you can save that one out right away using F3, and I'm saving it here in my textures folder. Skin Diffuse, spell it correctly, and I'll save it as a 16-bit PNG. 16-bit is usually better than 8-bit, so let's save that out, and I guess we can keep this open. Right, so let me just explain some of the tools in texture painting if you haven't used it before. Right here on the left hand side there is this panel, and it's got basically all the tools you need to actually paint on your model. So the tools one here, that's just tools, right? Brush, texture, texture mask, stroke, curve. These things I'll explain how they work, and we'll get in depth into them as we move along. The slots here, this shows you all your maps that you currently have assigned to this material. So right now we only have one map assigned to the skin material, and you can see the result in this little preview here, roughly what it's going to render like. So we'll be adding more maps later on, probably. So that's that. And then oh yeah, also here under slots there's this little button here, save all images. This basically in Blender, while you paint, it doesn't save immediately to your texture file. So make sure that you press this once in a while just to save all your progress. Even if you save Blender and quit and you forgot to press this button, it won't have saved the pixels that you painted. So just remember to save this once in a while and make sure that your texture is actually saved to your project files. So I've got mine here, Skin Diffuse, it's saved out. Just make sure it's been saved, otherwise you'll be painting doing a lot of work, and then somehow it won't save, and then it's a big headache. So just make sure you press this once in a while. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's go through some of the tools here. Okay, under the brush panel here, there are 6 options here under the brush button, and each of them they're pretty self-descriptive, like clone, basically like cloning in Photoshop. Fill is like a full brush. Mask, you can mask certain areas out if you don't want them to be affected, very useful. Smear is like, yeah, they're all pretty self-descriptive. We're going to be using fill first, just to get our basic skin color, right? Probably something like that. And then just click on your model and it'll fill it out. Brilliant. So that's what the fill does. And next up we have texture. Now this is a texture that you can assign to your brush. So you can actually go in and find some texture and actually paint on your model. Very useful in some cases. The brush mapping method is what is pretty important to this tutorial. The stencil mapping is what basically overlays the image onto your onto your viewport, so that you can paint through it onto your model. And I'll show you how that works in just a moment. Texture mask. This usually accepts a black and white image that you can assign to your brush, and it's very useful for painting things like skin pores and stuff like that. So I'll show you how that works also. Mask mapping, these are just settings for the texture mask. I'll show you how that works just a bit later. Curve, the curve setting affects your brush. So if I have, say, a brush like this, a curve like that, let me just select my text draw, that's the normal brush mode. If I have my curve set to, say, a sharp curve like this, then the actual image that you paint with your brush will be affected by that. So it's got a very soft fall off, as you can see. But if I set this to, say, what is it called, brush shape, If I set it to a more hard shape, then you can see it's immediately affected. So the curve shape just affects how the brush paints onto your model. So that's very useful. I usually go with a very soft brush in the beginning, one like this. Okay, now I'll show you how to assign a texture to your stencil so you can start painting. For this first phase, we'll probably be turning symmetry off. So under here, under the symmetry tab, you can just turn off X and it'll only paint on one side. So under the texture panel in here, just press new and you'll see it assigns a new empty texture to your texture brush, right? So I'll name mine Skin Stencil. Right? Okay. Now we want to assign an image to that so we can paint on our model. Let's go to the texture tab, and in this little button here, that's a little checkered button, that's the one we want. And make sure it's set to brush, not brush mask, brush skin stencil, right? And for this one, we just open and go to our texture that we want to paint. Mine is in assets, skin textures, and these textures here are what we'll be using to paint onto our model. These are our raw images. So I'll provide these in the description to the video. This texture here is what I'll be using for starters. This is a texture from the Digital Emily project that is like, it's got some really high quality textures that you can use for free. It's released under the Creative Commons license, I believe, so they're free for use, and that's really cool. And I exported this one from Photoshop at a 5K resolution. The original comes in a 16K or I think a 6K resolution. 16K, I think it's a 16K resolution, so it's really high res and it's really cool to use because it gives brilliant results most of the time. These other textures here are ones I just prepared that I use quite a lot for painting skin. So we'll be using this one first. So open image, and you'll see now it has the image in here and in here. And you want to make sure that your brush mapping is set to stencil, right? Now when it's set to stencil, you bring in your cursor to the viewport and you'll see immediately there's an image overlaid over your model. I don't know if you can see it, but it's like transparent. Now if you use right click, you can move this image around, and if you use shift right click, then it scales up and down, and if you use control right click, then it rotates the image, right? So this is basically what a stencil is and how it works. So now you'll see once you start painting on your model, you just drag the image into the right position, shift right click to scale it down a little bit, control right click just to rotate it. Right, now when you start painting, make sure that your brush color is set to complete white. So I'm just going to set it to white here, and make sure it's set the blend mode is set to mix. Now when you start painting on your model, you can see that it's actually start painting on the 3D model itself, and this is really powerful, and it makes a world of difference while you're painting onto 3D models and you want to get realistic results. So let's continue painting. Scale it up. Oh, hang on. Sorry. Okay. Scale it up. And for this center part of the face, the nose and the mouth area, I usually turn off symmetry so I can get a more natural result. Okay. And there are a few settings here that you can play with, like the size, if you want to manually scale the image up and down, or the angle, or something like that. Now I like to turn on ambient occlusion and shadeless in multi-texture mode when I'm painting. So the ambient occlusion enables me to just see the features of the face, but the shadeless checkbox here allows me to actually just see the raw texture without with minimal shading information. This helps to kind of visualize exactly how the diffuse texture looks. So that's useful. If you want to see it with shading information, just for a preview, then you can switch to GLSL mode here, and it'll just give you a shaded preview in the viewport. Just make sure you have some lights in your scene for GLSL mode, right? Okay, so I'm going to switch back to multi-texture and make sure shadeless is turned on. And by the way, this is in textured mode down here. Okay, so let's continue painting. If you ever need to pick a color, just hold S on the keyboard and it gives you a little eyedropper tool, and you can pick a color and it'll add it to your palette over here. So, but for stencil painting, you mostly want to remain with white because it's taking colors from this image here, and if you mix another color in, then it gives you a weird result. So just keep it white and you're good to go. Strength should also be, your brush strength should be mostly from 0.8 to 1 should be good. Okay, cool. So I'm going to start by lining up the eyes. And I'm using right click and shift right click and control right click to manipulate my image, and I'm just painting on top of the model through the image. And this is what makes stencil painting so powerful, is that you get to basically paint realistic textures straight onto your model with as little hassle as possible. Very intuitive, and I'm so glad Blender has this feature. Saved me countless hours of painting in Photoshop. Okay, and let's preview how this looks in GLSL mode. Looks great. And actually, for the cheek area, I can turn on symmetry. Okay, and you'll notice some of the skin textures that I'm painting in here aren't quite, they don't look quite pretty. You can see these dark patches over here, and well, we'll get rid of that in a moment. For now, let's just paint the raw skin texture onto the model. And whenever I get to the center of the face, I like to turn off symmetry because it shows up immediately if you've got symmetrical details on both sides of the nose, for example. So I guess you guys get the idea. This is basically how I paint, and I'm going to speed this up because from here on it's just basically putting in this texture over my model. So I'm going to speed it up, and I'll talk you through the rest once I'm done. Okay, so now that I've painted the main front part of the face using the stencil painting method, we now need to do some adjustments and start working on the other parts of the face. Just remember to save all images, this button right here, once in a while, otherwise you might lose your work somehow. So you'll notice there are some patchiness and some areas that need work. Well, those will be refined now and probably later in Photoshop some more. So it's not an issue, we can keep going. Let me add in my other skin texture by removing this one, skin stencil, and making a new one, and we'll call it skin generic stencil, right? And let's go to our texture tab here under the brush flyout, and let's add in the generic skin texture. Where is it? There it is, skin texture basic, and open it up. And this is just like a tiled skin texture that I made, or that I found somewhere online. I'm pretty sure it was for free, so I'll put this one in the link as well in the description. For this one, I just paint the broader open areas of the skin, like the scalp and areas like that. They'll just they won't be seen very much in your final work, because it's like it'll be hidden by hair anyway, but it's good to paint it anyway, just in case you might need it. So let's just paint it in, and I'm working really fast here. Finish up the neck. Looks pretty good. Let's add in another texture for our stencil. This time we'll be using the ear texture that I made over here. Right, so let's scale it down and probably flip it. How do you flip it again? I can't remember. Doesn't matter. Just turn on symmetry and paint on the other side. You can also adjust the size. I notice it's a bit squashed for some reason. Or you can shift and right click and then select the y-axis to scale it up. That's probably better. Okay. Paint this in, and this is looking really terrible, but I'm just you get the idea, so I'm just gonna do it real quick. Okay, let's load our other one back in, skin generic. Just trying to fix up some of these areas here. Scale it back down. I see it remained distorted like that a little bit. Okay. Fix up a couple of things here. Okay, that's done for our base skin texture that we just painted. That's basically it, and you can remove your stencil map. So now we have we'll just hide these lights. Let's go back in there. Okay, so now we can start refining this and start fixing errors and removing stuff that we don't want. For that, we're going to need to use texture mask mode. So for this mode, we're going to be making a custom brush mask with which to paint over this diffuse that we already have here. So new, and then call it skin mask, and in your texture panel under the brush, add new. Actually, this should be brush mask, and go in here, open, and I've got some nice alphas here. These are all black and white. The mask mode usually works with, is intended to work with black and white images, I think. So we'll be using the small pores brush, open image, and for this mode it's usually I sometimes use add, I think, and if you press S on the keyboard, it'll clone the texture anywhere on your model. I usually take like a medium texture, right, like that, and then you just start painting over your skin to kind of fix it up in areas that you want to work on. But this is too strong, so let's just go back a little bit and set the strength down. And your mask mapping can be random. What else? Oh, these look good. Rake random. Yeah, that's fine. Let's just we can turn on symmetry for this. It's not too close to the center of the face, so we can do that. We can also do mix. And then you just sample colors from anywhere on the skin and just blend them in a little bit, just to kind of get rid of those dark patchy areas. And we can preview this in GLSL mode. Just have on my pores brush. And by the way, I'm using a mouse for this entire tutorial. I usually use a tablet, a Wacom tablet, but for this I thought I'd just use a mouse because it seems like most people who are just getting into this don't have tablets yet. Beginners type people don't always have access to a tablet, so I thought I'd make this tutorial with the other one as well. So yeah, this is just a very light, subtle wash that I'm putting across the entire model. But of course, the clone tool is your main ally when you're trying to fix errors. So for this patch over here, for the clone tool, you want to control click anywhere on your model, and the cursor will snap to that location, and that's the area that's going to be cloned. So you can see it's currently cloning that area right there. Control click, clone, control click, clone, control click. Very nice. Rapidly helps you to rapidly fix up errors. That's cool. And I guess this is pretty much almost done. We can fix this area on the upper lip a little bit. GLSL mode, preview. Let's work on this area here, turn off symmetry. I always turn off symmetry while I'm working on the center of the face. But this is looking pretty good. And we can, I think the area around the eyes is a bit dark. Just brighten that up a little bit. Don't worry if you're losing too much detail on the skin texture. some of the pores and those little fine details get lost, but that's okay, because we'll be making a bump map for this in Photoshop, and the bump map is the really important one. The diffuse map isn't that important. Bump map is where you get most of your details from. Okay, this is pretty much almost done. I just need to put some red inside the eyes and on the nose and on the cheeks. So we can go to our text draw brush, go for a pink red type color. That's probably a bit much. And you can disable this. Turn on symmetry as well, because we're not close to the center of the face. And let's just paint in a subtle red texture right there. You can preview it in shaded mode. That's looking okay. Let's blend it in just a little bit. Might need my pores brush again. And that's fine. And that might be a bit much. We can also use our pores brush for this. Turn it off. And the cheeks area, a little bit, perhaps some reddish pores. Actually, for this, turn on symmetry. So you can see I'm constantly turning symmetry on and off to try and decide based on, you know, where on the face I'm working. So I might need to clone some more to fix some of those errors on the forehead. So clone, just kind of blend this in a little bit more. And it's looking pretty creepy right now, but we'll fix that, especially in shadeless mode. Looks pretty disturbing. Okay, this is far from perfect, but you get the idea, so we'll leave it with this. Remember to save all images. So now we have our base texture painted out, and we can start working on it in Photoshop. Okay, so now we're in Photoshop, and I just want to do a few corrections here before we go back into Blender. You could probably do this stuff in a Gimp or Krita or whatever. Personally, I've used all of them and they all work fine. In this case, it's just Photoshop. So I'm just checking for errors here. I want to check the ears. The ears don't look very good, so I'm going to use the cloning thing here to just fix it up a little bit, right? And might just do that. And really quickly here, I'll probably spend more time on this as if I was doing this as a normal project, but as I said, this is just for a tutorial, so we'll be going faster than usual. That'll have to do. Now, another thing we want to do before we go out of Photoshop is to enhance these skin details a little bit. So right now it's just a little bit blurry, and I like to add a little bit of sharpness to it. The way I usually do this is to duplicate this layer with Ctrl J, and in the top layer I can add a filter and under the other section here, high pass. So this filter, basically what it does is it makes a sort of a sharpen map. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but if you select a value between 2 and 8, say probably out 4.1, press OK, and then overlay it with the overlay blend mode onto your diffuse, your main diffuse, the difference is quite obvious. You can see that it's now a lot sharper and the details are more clear and so on. And in fact, it's too much, so I like to bring it down a little bit, probably about 45%. That should be good. Okay, so let's save this out as a PNG, skin diffuse. Save, yes, and okay, and just wait for it to finish up down here. Okay, so now it's been saved out. Another thing you quickly want to do is to save out this overlay map as a normal blend mode. Save it out on its own because we'll be using it as well. This is going to be a micro bump map that we're going to put over our normal map. So we'll call it micro bump. This is just to give that extra little bit of detail to the skin. It's completely optional, but it does help quite a bit. So that's done, and now we can do our final map, which is the roughness map, and we can also do that in Photoshop. So if you're not familiar with roughness maps, they work almost the same way as specular maps. Like it's just like a black and white map that tells the render engine where to make the model more or less shiny. Now, if you were to go to your image here and just desaturate it, this could be a good base to start with your roughness map. We can do a few things to enhance that and get better results in the final render. So first thing you want to do is to go and zoom out here, and I want to import my ambient occlusion map that I generated earlier. So an ambient occlusion map can be used for a lot of things, and enhancing your roughness maps is one of those things. So just import it and just approve it here. Okay, so let's set the blend mode on this ambient occlusion map to multiply, and now you can see that we've got some extra roughness information that's being simulated by this ambient occlusion map, but it's not perfect, so we'll just adjust it a little bit. So first of all, the lips area here have to be shinier. In general, lips are shinier than the rest, so we can use our brush here and select a dark, like just select black, right, and set the strength to about 20%, and let's just make these lips a little bit darker, because remember, darker areas are shinier, so we want the lips to be a little bit shinier. And the eyes, you can see that the ambient occlusion map did a great job here. The eyes, around the eyes, it's darker. It's going to be looking a little bit shinier than the rest. Below the chin here, it's a bit too shiny for my taste, so I'll just come over this with my eraser and just lighten it up a little bit to get it less shiny. Okay, and the nose we want darker, a little bit darker, because in general the nose is a little bit shinier than the rest. It's probably a little bit much. Okay, and then of course let's take the strength of this down even more and just very lightly go over the cheeks. Take a little bit of this harsh dark area away here around the ears, so we can we don't want overkill. Remember, even this map isn't perfect yet. We'll be adjusting it a little bit in the cycles node editor to get the final result, but this is looking pretty good. The inside of the ears can be a little bit shinier. Let's just go over that with our brush. Again, using just black and a very, very weak brush, we can get that result. And now obviously there's always, you can play around with your exposure a little bit. I just added an exposure layer here, and I can take it down a little bit or bring it up or whatever, but I'm choosing not to do that because I think it's better to do that in cycles when we can actually see the results in real time, so to speak. So let's save this out, our roughness map. Control-Shift-S, and save it out as a PNG, and I'll call it skin roughness, and save it out. But I've already saved mine out, so that's good. And now you can see that we've got basically 5 maps here that that we can use to build our final shader in Cycles. So the 3 maps here on the right side are normals, skin diffuse, and skin roughness. These are pretty much essential to modern PBR based workflows. And then we've got our ambient occlusion and micro bump maps here, which are optional but very useful indeed. So let's jump into Blender and put all of this together for our final shader. Okay, so now we're back in Blender and we've got our model, and I've switched to Cycles here. And I've got a basic lighting setup, which is like just a 3-point lighting with my key light, full light, rim light, with an extra full light here coming from the right side. So let's select our model and delete that default diffuse and start importing our textures. So texture, image texture, open. And let's take that skin diffuse, copy this. Let's make this window larger. Okay, copy this, bring in the normals, copy it again, bring in the skin roughness, and last of all we bring in the micro bump. Now we might use the ambient occlusion, it's optional, but for now we'll leave it. Open this up. Okay, we've got our 4 main textures: diffuse, normals, roughness, and micro displacement. And let's add in a diffuse shader. We always start with that and add our diffuse to that, and plug that in there. And then we add in a mix and add a subsurface scattering, and add our diffuse shader to the subsurface scattering. And there, here under scale, you want to set the scale to a value that corresponds with the size of your mesh. So let's just check what our mesh size is. Dimensions here is 1 Blender unit by 2 by 3. So with that in mind, I think a value of about 0.1 would be good to start with. Under radius here, these values here stand for red, green, and blue. So sometimes I just like to set them manually to 1, 0.2, and 0.2. That will make the red value a lot stronger than the green and blue. But I've noticed that also to just use your diffuse shader and plug it in here with a color mix RGB curves and just make it a lot more red, and bring down the brightness a little bit. That also helps and works very well. So we have like a red scattering color that kind of simulates the blood vessels under the skin. And that's about it for the subsurface scattering. Now we want a normal map to be plugged in here. So let's just add a vector normal map node, and this is our normal map here. Let's just set it to non-colored data. Just plug the color in there and plug your normals into the normals slot on each of these. Okay, let's add in a glossy shader and plug it in here. Let's plug our gloss map into the roughness input, and the roughness, the normals into the normal input right there. Okay, and the color here is usually something thereabouts. Okay, so this is our basic skin. So we've got our diffuse driving the diffuse and subsurface scattering. We've got a red diffuse color driving the radius, the scattering radius on the subsurface scattering, and we've got our normal map driving the bump value on each of these nodes, these shaders here, and we've got our skin roughness driving the roughness component here of the glossy shader. Another thing we can really quickly do is to bring in a Fresnel node and just plug it into the value, the factor of the glossy and the diffuse shaders here. And we can also do plug this normals in here. So I find a value of about 1.3 usually works quite good. Yeah, let's preview this before we move any further. So let me just isolate this here and give this a quick render. Okay, so this is our render, and already you can see it's looking not too shabby, not too bad. We've got a few issues. I think the ears don't look quite right, but that's because my diffuse map is a bit I didn't do that so well, but I guess you could fix that if you just go back into Photoshop and paint a little bit more red and take off some of those oranges. I think the scattering size could be a little bit wider possibly, and I think the glossiness here shouldn't be quite so sharp, probably a little bit more diffused out. So let's start working on those things. Oh yeah, and we have to add in our micro bump before I forget. Let's do that. Let's add in the micro bump. Add in a vector bump node here, and plug your micro bump color into your normal, into your height, I mean, and plug your normal map into the normal slot here, and we plug this into the normals. Actually, yeah, just plug them in everywhere, I guess. Doesn't really matter. Yeah, that's about it. And we can make our gloss color a bit brighter, but the actual gloss roughness map here needs to be a little bit brighter. So we can add in a RGB curves node and just pop it in here and just bring up the color like so. And that should work pretty well to make those values a little bit more diffused. So yeah, we could also add in a little bit more of this to get perhaps some of that red highlights on the ears. Let's test this render. Okay, so that's rendered, and you can see it's looking quite a bit better. Well, the difference isn't huge, but if you were to compare it before and after, you'd see quite a difference. Another thing I forgot to say, the strength of your micro bump here should be pretty low. It was set all the way up to 1, and that's just wrong, you know, it's completely too strong. So just set it about 0.1 or thereabouts, and it adds some nice tiny little details which aren't really visible here because it's a low res render. But yeah, apart from that, the ears still look a little bit weird, but it's possible for a tutorial. If you wanted to adjust that, you'd probably go back into Photoshop and take away some of those oranges and put in a little bit more pink colors like here and so on. So yeah, that's the basics. That's the shader, and you could tweak these values for the roughness, and you could even add in a color RGB curves here and kind of play with the colors here to get the actual tone of the skin, to tweak that a little bit. And you could extend this and customize it and do quite a lot of interesting cool stuff with this. But that's basically how I approach setting up my shaders, and I do it with just these basic maps, the roughness, micro bump, normals, and diffuse. And yeah, that's it. That's my skin shading and texturing tutorial. I hope you guys learned something. Again, sorry for the crappy recording. I hope it wasn't too painful. and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.